had a late night meeting with the Director General of Unesco last night, and we made very clear our strong disappointment, even our bewilderment, that our officials have been blindsided in the way that they have. Only a week ago, we were reassured that this was not going to occur.
So we have David Cazzulino with us. He's a Great Barrier Reef campaigner at the Australian Marine Conservation Society, joining us now. So David, just to get a scale of this reef, it is thousands of kilometers long. It is visible from space, and we know that it has lost half of its corals, half, since 1995 because of warmer ocean temperatures. So since Australia itself deemed it to be in very poor condition just 2 years ago, one could reasonably ask, why is it such a stretch for the UN to call it in danger?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Scientists have been warning about the huge threat that climate change poses to our Great Barrier Reef and coral reefs around the world for decades now. The Australian government's own scientists warned that the outlook for our Great Barrier Reef has been downgraded to very poor in the last 2 years, and this was then followed up by the International Union for Conservation of Nature, who deemed the overall health of the reef to be critical. This is not to say that our reef isn't still beautiful, and once travel is permitted after the pandemic, I would still encourage people to come and visit the beautiful Great Barrier Reef. However, as you say, we've lost around 50% of the shallow water corals on this beautiful place, and we stand to lose more unless the world takes decisive action, and that starts with climate leadership here in Australia. This decision from the UNESCO shows that the Australian government has failed to take leadership on climate change, and in fact, we're trailing behind the rest of the world. We don't even have a net zero emissions target.
So why would the government of Australia be so sensitive about this when essentially it has acknowledged that there is a real problem with the barrier reef and that it does need to do more over time?
That's a great question. And I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that we love the Great Barrier Reef. Even people who don't believe we should be acting on climate change, it's still a core part of our identity, and it's a beacon for millions of tourists from around the world in normal times. But the Australian government has not done anything on climate change. In fact, it's actively supporting new fossil fuel projects, with new fossil fuel gas infrastructure receiving federal government money at a time when the world is warning that we need to take decisive action on climate change, which means an end to new fossil fuel projects, including the latest report from the International Energy Agency, which isn't, a particularly activist group of people.
So the Australian government has not been willing to commit to net zero emissions by the year 2050, but on the other hand, it has spent billions to try to protect this reef. So do scientists feel that there is something that the government should be doing or could do that would actually help restore it to, at the very least, a greater degree of health?
So the UNESCO has outlined what the Australian government would need to do to take the Great Barrier Reef off the endangered list and on the normal World Heritage list. And those sort of actions would involve, one, Australia doing our fair share to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. And that starts with a net zero target and bold emission reductions target this decade. It also is urging the Australian government to step up efforts on localised issues such as poor water quality, which involves pollution running off from farms into rivers and out into the Great Barrier Reef waters. So there are a number of things that Australia needs to do, and it needs to use this money more targeted, and to also not then allow the further expansion of the fossil fuel industry that is contributing to its #1 threat, which is climate change.
All right, David, thank you for that.